first thing is can tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm a 500-hour Vini yoga teacher, and that training includes the art and science of sequencing. And it's not just the sequencing of asanas and postures, it's also the whole sequencing of a comprehensive practice. So that would include if you wanted to do pranayama or meditation or chanting, how would you plan an entire arc of an integrated practice to get to the inner practices of yoga too. So I also have 20 years experience of practicing yoga and 10 years of experience teaching, and that includes hatha yoga, vinyasa, yin classes, a little bit of Ashtanga. And so I have experience with a bunch of different approaches, and I have a huge amount of respect for other approaches to yoga, not just strictly a Vini yoga person. I'm also a certified personal trainer and professional dancer, and so the fitness approach to things also influences my thoughts about how to sequence yoga practices. And I wanted to do this free webinar because for practitioners, I truly believe that everyone deserves an effective and enjoyable movement practice. And for teachers, I really want to help improve the quality of group classes all around by giving some tools and tips for yoga classes for teachers to make their classes safer and more satisfying for practitioners. And that's good for you because that means that your students will feel good, they'll keep coming back to your classes, and it helps our entire field of profession when we're all more expert and more knowledgeable and more compassionate towards our students. So yay. And I recognize also that sometimes yoga teacher trainings don't go into a huge amount of detail about sequencing. And so I want to help fill in any gaps that people may have from their teacher training. And I also want to help reduce burnout, because I know sometimes it's easy to get totally caught up in planning classes, and you can spend hours, infinite amount of time of trying to get class plans put together. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be way more efficient. It'll save you time. You'll have more time to do things like actually practice yoga or do whatever it is that you want to do for the rest of your day. So we'll get started. I can gonna share my screen with you so that you can see all of my secrets here. There we go. Okay, so here we are, yoga sequencing principles and pitfalls with Flissy. That's me. And you can find more details on my website, yogawithflissy.com. So first we'll take a look at what are some common pitfalls that teachers and practitioners fall into when trying to plan a sequence or a class. So one of the very common ones is to start with static postures first. So a lot of times it's easy to, you're already generally sitting when you begin a yoga practice. And so it might seem like an easy thing to do to go right into a seated forward bend, and hang out there for some amount of time. It's not a bad rationale. It seems like it's an easy way to start. You start with kind of sitting and being still. However, seated forward bends are among the most stressful things you can do for your body. Your pelvis is fixed, and it doesn't give you a lot of room for your body to make accommodations if you're feeling stiff or naturally tight. And so it can be quite uncomfortable if someone is already feeling tight, if they've already been sitting a lot. It's much better to do those long held seated postures towards the end of the practice or somewhere in the middle once your body is a little bit warm. And also, if depending on what people are doing in their day, it can be really hard to sit still initially. You need a little bit of transition time from the rest of your day before you can get into a more still kind of practice. So one, it's better to get the big muscles and joints warmed up before you go into a long static hold. And also it's good for your mind and making that transition to do a little bit of movement first. Second thing is things can get too complicated too early on. So this could include, instead of introducing a basic version of a posture, you could start with some variation that might include a bind or a difficult way to get into it. And so particularly if you're working with a mixed level group of students, if you start introducing complicated variations on things, it can be overwhelming and people will not feel like they're successful because there's something complex right off the bat. So, and this can also include, if you're teaching a vinyasa practice, having too complex transitions or too long of a string of things together that's hard to remember. So you have to kind of ease people into every part of the practice, not just getting the body warmed up, but also turning on your learning brain and your ability to pay attention in a practice. Another common one is poor preparation and or compensation for complicated postures. So these two things can kind of go together. If you do a too complicated thing too early, that probably also means that you haven't quite prepared fully for that posture. You haven't done a simple version of it first, or you haven't warmed up the joints adequately. So those two things kind of go together. And so we are kind of already getting into how to address these things, but a very simple thing to help address both the too complicated too early and poor preparation is when you take a look at a posture, you can also identify what are the parts of the body that might need to be warmed up or might be problematic for those for that posture. And so in this slide I have here, Ustrasana or camel pose, the circles, orange circle around the neck and shoulders, the purple circle around the spine, and the pink circle around the hips. So those are some areas that you want to make sure are warmed up before you go into a deeper back bend, and also areas where are generating a little extra stress. So you'd want to address those areas after doing that big back bend, as well as doing some things to prepare before. The other thing is too many postures. So this can be, like I mentioned earlier, with the too complicated too early, having too many strings of things in a row if you're trying to get people to remember a sequence, or you might have just too much of a smorgasbord, trying to do too much at one time with not a particular focus. So if you're just kind of grabbing postures willy-nilly to put them together just for the sake of filling a class, it will often lack a sense of flow about it, or it might be hard to understand how those poses are relate to one another, or what purpose they serve. So here, I'm only busting on myself here. So I have a sequence of some postures that I used in a vinyasa class, and it's not a terrible sequence of things. It's some standing postures that transition from a wide leg forward bend to headstand, and then some twists with a balance before you go into a vinyasa. So it's not a terrible sequence, but if you were to teach that at the very beginning of a practice, it would be 1, too complicated. 2, it would be way too many postures right off the bat. And there would not be adequate compensation or adequate preparation for headstand. There would not be adequate compensation for headstand either. So again, it's not a bad sequence. This would have been in the middle or towards the end of a practice. So it's not terrible, but it's just a sample of some things to look for. And then the all-encompassing mistake that I often see in yoga classes is yoga choreography, which often includes a little bit of all of the above. And so if you're doing yoga choreography, again, it might be on intentionally difficult transitions. It could be intentionally tricky and fancy and complicated postures that don't necessarily serve a purpose of teaching anything. And so if you're making classes just for the sake of making them hard or making them really athletic or strenuous, I would invite you to see if you could have a deeper purpose to those things, so that you could actually be teaching something in your class. And also, if you're strictly doing yoga choreography, there's a good chance that you might be falling victim to some of these other pitfalls and creating a class that isn't as safe or as effective as it could be. Okay, so there's some problems that we might encounter in a class. And so how do we avoid these pitfalls when we're planning a class? So for one is I invite you to connect with your big why. So why is it that you're teaching yoga? What is it that you get out of doing a yoga practice? If you come back around to that big why, then it becomes a little bit easier to generate ideas for what to practice next. So, and your big why, it might not be like super existential, like, yeah, it might not be like a super deep and existential answer to your why for the sake of creating a class. If you're just making a yoga class, you could be like, okay, why is it that I'm showing up to teach this particular group of students? I want to be able to teach them to relax more. So let's just say, for the sake of this discussion, your why is I want to help my students to relax. So then you use your big why to set an intention for the class. And so your intention is basically answering, how is it that you're going to teach your big why? So why am I teaching this class? I want to help people to relax more. How am I going to do that today? So if you are planning a class that you want to help people relax, that might mean, okay, well, what postures relate to that? Okay, I could do more forward bends. I could do more twists. I could focus on longer holds rather than a lot of repetition through strenuous transitions. It could be more laying down. So that kind of gives you an idea of some postures that could work for your practice, and also sort of a general approach to doing it, whether you want to have a lot of repetition and vinyasa, or if you want to have a little bit more still kind of practice, or somewhere in between. And then, so once you have your big why, you've addressed how you might do that, what kinds of postures, and then you're going to follow some fundamental principles to create a sequence from those two things. All right, so let's take a look at these fundamental sequencing principles. So you're going to start with a simple intention. So with this class that we are making up, it's going to be, we want to help people to relax. So that might include some forward bends, it might include some twists, it might include some longer held postures. And the next principle is that general fitness rules apply. So this includes starting with a warm-up. So that's going to be like, generally a good guideline is like a 5 minutes or so to just help get the big muscles warmed up, to help lubricate the joints, and to start to integrate that mind-body connection that we use in a yoga practice. So I respect the fact that there are some practices that are more meditation focused. They're still practices, and so that might be, there's exceptions to that rule, but in general, doing some simple warm-up before you get into the bulk of your class is a good idea. And also just being familiar with all of that boring anatomical stuff. So knowing your main joints and muscles and how they move and what they move is going to be helpful, so that will inform how you choose what postures you're going to be using, the progression that it takes, and analyzing the postures that you'll incorporate to help prepare and compensate for the more complicated ones. And then the next thing is to be aware of planes. And so in this case, I'm not talking about anatomical planes, I'm talking about planes in terms of levels. So this is going to be like supine, laying on your back, kneeling, standing, seated, prone, laying on your belly. So if you have a practice that includes a lot of transitions between those planes, it's going to be more strenuous and more complicated. And if you have a practice where there are fewer transitions, it's going to be a little bit simpler and has the potential to be gentler. So you'll take into consideration the group of people that you're teaching, and that can help you decide whether you want to keep things simple in terms of those transitions between planes, or if you want to make things more strenuous by having more transitions up and down from the ground. So there's no right or wrong way necessarily to use those planes. Although what I've illustrated here is the simple, well, it's simple, but I would say ignore that prone one. That's just for demonstration. All these things are, we have Apanasana, knees to chest. We have got Balasana, child's pose. We have Uttanasana, a standing forward bend. We have Paschimottanasana, seated forward bend. So those 4 postures in that order are from the least strenuous to the most strenuous. And so if you're just aware of the different positions that your body can be in, and that can inform the choices that you make. And again, use proper preparation and compensation. So like the example that I gave with the, oops, where'd you go? The Ustrasana camel pose back here. If you take a few minutes to analyze the places that have the most stress in the body, that can help you choose postures that are going to help prepare those areas. So for example, for that Ustrasana, you want to have some simple back bends to prepare for that bigger back bend, to prepare the hips and quads. You want to do some maybe kneeling lunges or warrior poses to warm up the legs. And you want to do something to address the neck and shoulders, particular after you're done, because your head is back in that fixed position. You might want to do some simple twists from side to side to release any residual tension around the neck. All right, let's hop back over to this other slide. We got a simple intention. You're gonna just consider your general fitness rules. You're gonna be aware of the planes of what orientation your body is in space and how simple or complex it is to get up and down off the ground. And then you'll use proper preparation and compensation. And then move from simple to complex. And so this is related also to the proper preparation. So a way to prepare for doing complicated postures or postures that require a lot of flexibility is to start with simple ones first. So you can even see in this planes illustration going from child's pose to a seated forward bend. All of those are a seated, kneeling forward bend like child's pose is simpler than the seated forward bend. A better example is this illustration between triangle pose and this version of Ardha Chandrasana, which I've drawn with a bind holding onto the foot. So before you go for a single leg balance with a bind, you want to go for something that is standing on 2 feet. There's no bind, your hands are free. You want to go from free, so no bind, to fixed, that would be with a bind or having leverage in some way. And then going from 2 legs to 1 leg, so go from stable to unstable. And then also consider the risks versus benefits. So I know I busted on yoga choreography a little bit, but if you are planning intentionally, like, no, like that's what I do. Like I'm gonna make a really bananas class and I wanted to make it as hard as possible. I'm gonna make it strenuous. I'm gonna make it really fancy with a lot of tricky transitions. It's not necessarily bad to do that, but you wanna consider the risks that go along with that. So, okay, well, we're making really difficult transitions up and down off the ground. We're doing something like including a lot of vinyasas, and you want to take a little extra care into the preparation for those things. So that short sequence that I showed a little bit earlier that had the headstand in there, that's a risky, like that sequence is a more risky sequence of posture. So you want to make sure that before you go into that long sequence, and make sure that you have done some preparation for headstand. You want to have a little bit of core strength. You want to check in with your neck and shoulders and make sure that is something that you even want to do that day. And then once you're finished, once you've done this bananas flow that you put together, you want to just make sure that you also compensate appropriately for that. So you want to make sure that you let go of any tension around the neck and shoulders if you've done something like headstand, or if you've done some posture or sequence that's risky because it requires a lot of flexibility. You want to do some other sequence of things that's going to bring stability back into the area. So it's not necessarily bad to have things that are more risky in your practice. You just want to make sure, again, that you have the proper balance of preparatory and compensation poses. And you want to consider also the benefits of doing that thing. So the benefit might be as simple as, you know what, I have a bunch of athletes, they really want this super strenuous practice, and they know that it is that what they're doing, they could fall out of a posture, but the benefit of giving them what they want is that's enough for me, or the benefit of feeling a sense of achievement for completing a complex posture, that could be all that's required. So these are all things just to consider when you're putting together a practice. And so what I invite you to do is to just keep all of these principles in mind, and maybe go back and take a look at one of your lessons that you have planned, or one that you have already taught is particularly helpful. Go back and look at your notes, and then compare what you have prepared with these sequencing principles, and just see if those, if your practice that you've prepared is in alignment with these principles that I've laid out. And if they're not, just think about like how would you change it so that it aligned with these principles, and then give that practice a try and see how it feels different, and see what it turns out to be based on those ideas. So this is just like one approach to putting together a class. And then once I get into the 6-week series, we'll go into much more detail about these principles and how to use these things to actually build a class in a step-by-step way. Oh, hi, Piper. So let's get out of this sharing deal. Okay. So I will pause now and see if anybody has any questions. So feel free to, you can unmute yourself, and if you have any questions, let me know. So if there is any particular challenge that you face in putting together classes or yeah, anything at all, you can let me know. And you can also let me know what you think about that, those principles. If you use any of them in your class, I'll just kind of open it up for discussion for a minute. And next week, I'll be back same time, 8:30 Monday night, and we'll do another free webinar. It's going to be, this one is going to be on planning a class for mixed levels of experience. And I will tell you, spoiler alert, they are all mixed levels, whether that's what you think you're teaching or not. The next thing that I have coming up is going to be a 6-week workshop online course that is all about yoga sequencing secrets. So as I mentioned, it will include some of the things that I went over tonight, and also will include a worksheet for building a class step by step, a basic outline for filling in a yoga practice, and working in basically any style or approach to yoga, any context. So if you have training in one approach, these principles you can apply to teach any class anywhere. So you'll get in your email tomorrow a video copy of this replay so that you can watch it again and take notes if you like. And it'll also have details about how to register for that online course. The first 20 people to register will get a free 30-minute yoga sequencing review. So that's going to be a 30-minute coaching call with me. I'll take a look at the sequence that you prepared. And if you have any questions about your sequence, I can give you some feedback about it, or yeah, if you have any questions about it, I can help you work through making plans for whatever kind of class that you're working with. So first 20 people, there's still some spots available for that. And the cost of the 6 weeks course is $95. It includes my How to Draw Yoga Stick Figures course for free. That's usually $45. And it starts March 11th. So the price is going to go up on that next week, so you'll want to hop in on that deal. And if there's no further questions, I will say thank you so much for joining me. I hope you got something out of our workshop this evening. And if you have any questions coming up, just let me know. You can send me an email, flissy@omchantress.com. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Bye.